Good evening. I'm Lori Beth Huffman, the Appalachian District Superintendent, and I want to welcome you to our webinar tonight that is for our church councils across the Appalachian District. So I'm thankful that you have gathered so that we can share and talk about what are your roles and responsibilities tonight. Let me first do some introductions and thank yous for those who helped make this possible. Charlotte Brindle is off to my left, and she is the Appalachian District Congregational Vitality Strategist, and she will be receiving your email questions as the night progresses, and will share those with me so that I can answer those as we go along. And I also want to say a special thank you to the IT team here at the Charlotte Conference office, Chris Quinn and Bryce Holden, for helping to make all of this logistically possible. So we will get started. I want to make sure you've got all of the handouts. We have several tonight. We'll be referencing some of them, and then some of them are for your reading. So you have one handout with the agenda and the email address that you can email questions to. You have a Book of Discipline, Church Council handout. You have one that is titled Church Council Overview. You have one entitled Leadership Pointers, and then a resource sheet for church council members. So let's get started, and we will begin by talking about the Book of Discipline requirements and outline of your responsibilities. And so let me just highlight some of the things off of your Book of Discipline handout. So the paragraph 252 talks about the church council. The big picture here, your responsibilities are the planning and implementing a program for nurture, outreach, witness, and resources in the local church. And then you are also to provide the administration for its organization. And we are essentially going to spend the rest of the night talking about what does that mean? How does that play out for you? And so I would summarize this as your primary roles are to envision and implement the ministries of the church, as well as to oversee the administration so that those ministries can actually take place, and to recognize yourself as the ultimate decision makers on behalf of the ministry and function of your church. And so finding that balance between mission and ministry and administration is one of the keys to being really successful with church council. And so the Book of Discipline then goes on to talk about what is mission and ministry oversight. And the model that the Book of Discipline offers now is the NOW model: nurture, outreach, and witness. And this is a suggestion, and many churches are organized this way, but there is room and freedom to tweak this as you figure out what works best for your church. But we're going to talk through, because this gives some of the basic fundamentals of what should be included in a well-rounded ministry of your church. And so nurturing ministries is essentially disciple making and congregational care. It is helping to lift up and nurture and mature disciples along their faith journey as you care for one another in community. The outreach ministries is essentially the missions and service ministry of the church, and where you reach out into the community or the world, where you are working with ministries of compassion, of justice, and advocacy. And then the witness ministry is evangelism. It is the sharing of the good news with the community and the world. And then it also talks about mission and ministry. The church council should make sure that leadership development is taking place. So a nominations committee actually is responsible for leadership development, but where that may not be happening within that committee within the church or team within the church, then it is your responsibility as a church council to make sure that the leaders know what their job is and help strengthen and develop their capacity to lead. And then the last suggestion is to develop a prayer ministry to help undergird all that you do in the life of your church. So then number 3 talks about meetings, and the suggestion is that it shall, not suggestion, shall means you will, meet at least quarterly. Many churches meet monthly, but you have to meet at least quarterly as a church council. And the pastor or the chairperson may call a special meeting if something comes up and you need to attend to that business. And this is, I think, really important. Even the Book of Discipline lays this out to say that in order for the council to really attend to the business well, the suggestion is that you order the agenda so that the mission and ministry items come first and then deal with the administrative business. Because so often we can get caught up and lost and derailed by the administrative work that we run out of time to do the important visioning and ministry oversight work. It also suggests that you use a consensus and discernment model of leadership and decision making as opposed to just taking a vote on everything. That have conversation and try and work until you get everyone in agreement or at least at peace with the decision that is being brought before you. So then it talks about other responsibilities, and so here are some other things that is your duty to attend to. You should make sure that an audit of your membership rolls takes place, that you are appropriately and adequately keeping up with your church membership. If vacancies happen through the year with a leadership person, then you do not have to have a called charge conference to do that. The church council, are able to receive nominations for replacements from the nominations team, and you can vote and approve to replace a new member that way. You also are to establish the budget with work with the recommendation from the Committee on Finance to make sure that the financial needs of the church are in fact being met. And then D and E are both essentially the church council, ultimately approve the clergy compensation package that the staff, parish, and finance committee would work together on to bring to you for approval, that you would bring then to the church council, the church charge conference to be approved at that meeting. That's one of those very important pieces of business that a charge conference must approve, and you must do the work to make sure that the package being presented is appropriate and all the details are taken care of. So then this handout talks about membership, and I'm going to use another handout to talk through that, although I will point out that a quorum for church council is defined as the members present that show up at a duly announced church council meeting. So you don't have to have a certain percentage of your council to be present. A quorum is whoever attends and shows up at that meeting. So I would like to move to the church council overview and talk about one paragraph here, and then we'll spend some time talking about who makes up the church council. But this second paragraph, I think, is an interesting and helpful way of talking about this balance between mission and ministry and administration. And they talk about leadership and management, that your twofold function includes both leadership and management. Leadership is being the visionaries, the holding the big picture. It says the work that big picture work that assesses critically where is your congregation in the present moment. What are you striving to do? What are your ministry goals? How are you getting there? And really taking the time to evaluate and then adjust as you need to. And then the management is that detail work that has to be taken care of in order for the congregation to function effectively. So then if you will turn this over, we'll talk about the committee membership. And so first I want to share with you the recommendation by the Book of Discipline. And so this is a may, which means instead of a shall. And so a may in the Book of Discipline means there's freedom and flexibility to tweak this as it needs to be adjusted for your church. But this is a very typical model of what most churches do. So you may have as few as 11 or as many as however many is elected at your charge conference to serve on your church council team. And typically, you would have the following persons as members of the team or representatives of their area. So you would have the chairperson of church council. You'd have the lay leader. You have the chair of PPRC, your pastor parish committee. You would have the chair of trustees. You would have the chair of finance, or a representative. It is true those chairpersons can elect or select someone else from that team or committee to represent them on the council. Your church treasurer would be a member. Lay member to annual conference is a church council member. And then you may have a representative from United Methodist Men and a representative from United Methodist Women. You may have a representative from your youth. And the pastor or pastors, any appointed pastors at the church are members of your church council. Then you can also have at-large members. A lot of churches will have at-large that rotate off on a 3-year term, just like our administrative teams, so that there's some continuity and history, and also that's a way to train up a potential church council chairperson as well, to let them experience it the first year and then step into a leadership role. Now, there are other ways in which you can organize yourself. And so I want to share with you another structure that's called a leadership board. And this structure, I've seen it used with large churches, medium-sized churches, and small churches. Ginghamsburg and Mike Slaughter have made this very popular, but I was at a conference in December with a medium-sized church that is also using this model. And so I'm actually going to subject you to my handwriting and drawing and show you what this looks like. So with a leadership team model, then you would essentially have one team that handles all of the decision-making and the work. So you may have 7 to 12 people, and they work as a team. But within this team, you would have people that then help with certain responsibilities. So let's say that you've got a PPRC staffing decision to do. Then you would have someone on here that would be the point person for the staffing conversation, and so the leadership team for that business would function as the PPRC. Let's say you have a building facility issue. So you would have someone that would function as that trustee point person, and when that business came up, you would then function as the trustees. Same thing with finance. Although I will say this is one area where some churches will go ahead and have a separate team because there really is a lot of financial information to take care of, and still have a representative onto the leadership team. You would have, your lay leader, and you would have your pastor or pastors, and obviously you would have your chairperson. But then you may also have folks that have a real passion for nurture ministries. You may have someone who has a passion for outreach and missions, and then also a passion for witness and evangelism. So with this model of 9 people, that may take up all of your people. But the point is that as you do certain business, then you would put on the hat that you need to put on to take care of the work that needs to be done. So you have one leadership team that then operates and handles a lot of the work. There are some pros and cons to that model. Certainly for the smaller churches, it would allow you to have one team that could do the work and not have every single person sitting on a committee, and then when the year comes to an end, you just rotate warm bodies to another committee. This would allow you to have a core group of leaders that function like the Book of Discipline needs you to function, but others can rest for a year and then rotate on next year in another position or a point of service. And then for larger churches, it gives you a little more flexibility and dexterity so you can make decisions and move ideas along faster than when they've got to go through all of the different teams. But do be mindful, it means that those folks that are serving are responsible for a great deal of work. So you've got to be committed to be willing to serve and handle the business, and then entrust those leaders to do that. Let me also say about our model of leadership that we are a democratic model. Whether you use a leadership team or the traditional method, Our church council, you are elected members to represent your congregation and to make decisions on behalf of your congregation. We do have a lot of people in our churches who come from a different denominational background, and they're used to congregational decision making where the whole church... Sorry about that technical difficulty. Let me finish my thought and we will keep going. I appreciate your patience. I was finishing the thought about the democratic versus congregational decision making, and just a reminder and an explanation that we aren't congregational. We don't make those decisions as a full church because they have elected you at the church at the charge conference to be those representatives. The only time we make decisions as the whole church is for a called church conference around things like a capital campaign, purchasing property, selling property, or renovation to a church building. Those really top dollar, large scope decisions that need to have everybody on board and supportive of. So we will move on, and I want to talk about the leadership pointers. So if you will turn and refer to that handout, you will see at the top it sort of gives a highlight, a little short synopsis of responsibilities of the board. So this is another way of kind of lifting up those items that you need to be attending to. Initiate planning, establish objectives, adopt goals, authorize action, determine policy, receive reports, evaluate the church ministries, and then review the mission and ministry of the church. Those are ongoing throughout the year. But I want to point out the responsibilities of a member. So here are some expectations of you as that elected member of church council. Regular attendance of monthly meetings. Regular attendance in worship. That's very important that you are part of the life of the church. Vote on the matters that are brought before the board. Attend and vote at church and all charge conferences, both charge and church conferences, and then to understand your term of office, which for many might be 3 years and rotate off, or it may be as a representative by that position. So as long as you are serving in that position, you will be on administrative council. And then I have a few keys to leadership, and this also comes from Mike Slaughter at Ginghamsburg United Methodist Church. And I think these are just some interesting points to be thoughtful of and consider how does your church either strive to do this, or where may you have some places where you can work. And so he talks about healthy churches are reliant on their leaders being healthy. And you can only go as far as you are yourself healthy and spiritually mature. So leaders must continue to aspire to grow. And as you grow and develop, then you can lead even more effectively. And so having folks around the table that are willing to grow and learn makes the church council function so much stronger. Slaughter also urges congregations to be missional rather than attractional. Missional in the sense of going outside of the church building, that it makes no sense, he says, to bring thousands, hundreds, whatever is relevant to your church, people into your church building if they're not being changed and transformed, if their lives aren't changing, if they are not maturing into disciples. And so instead, the focus should be on the church taking the good news out into the community. And then Slaughter's take on it, if it's not good news for the poor, then it's not the gospel. So what is the good news that your church is sharing to the world, to others, to the community? And then he finally says, at its core, a truly transformational, missional church only works when the leadership lets go of its numbers, neuroses, and the bureaucracy, and frees people to go into the world and serve with little oversight. And so the tip there is that you don't need to create so many rules that it becomes so difficult for ministry to happen. When someone has a great idea, how can you help translate that into ministry without stifling the work of the Spirit? And yet you need to have appropriate checks and balances and appropriate communication, but do that in a way that helps ministry to happen and take place. And then Romans 12, and this is also on your resource sheet, but this is an interesting email that the General Board of Discipleship has been sending out. And one of their, it's like an email newsletter, very brief, short one, and it has questions to consider. So it can be used with your council meetings, actually, to as a devotion. But one of them recently, I think, had some interesting markers of congregations that they deemed were healthy and effective in making disciples for Jesus Christ and transforming the world, which is essentially all of our mission statements. And so here are some markers. You can see, how are you doing with this? Clarity around the mission and vision of the congregation. Do you have clarity? Can you, if I stopped right now and gave you 30 seconds, could you, as a church council, together, name, verbalize by memory your vision or mission statement? And if you couldn't, then you don't know your mission statement well enough, because it needs to be the kind of statement that every one of your leaders can say without prompting. And that way you then allow to really get clarity, because you know it, you have it memorized, you know what it is you're trying to do. The second one, practice of spiritual disciplines, both corporately and individually. That is so important, that you yourselves are growing spiritually, that you are nurturing your soul, that you are developing your own faith. Also, the nurture of growth and discipleship through mutual support and accountability. So you see that not only as personal work you have to do individually, but you're doing it together with one another as a team. Cultivation of intentional and mutual relationships with the most vulnerable, the poor, children, imprisoned, powerless. So vital churches are cultivating relationships with those who are the least, the last, and the lost. And then another sign or a marker is consistent concern for inviting people into relationship with Jesus Christ, combined with wise practices for initiating them into the body of Christ. So what that's saying is, you're inviting and then you're nurturing them on their faith journey along the way. And then another marker, connectional relationships that facilitate participation in God's mission of global transformation. That means you recognize the power of the United Methodist connection, and you're able to engage the ministries and opportunities that we have to then reach out into the larger world. And then finally, shared clergy and lay leadership. The ministry of the church works so much better when the pastors and the lay leadership are working together hand in hand towards a common goal. So with that said, then let's take a moment and talk through these tips for success. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to stop and answer a couple of questions. So, one question, may non-office holding members vote as well? And so I'm not sure what non-office holding members mean, so let me clarify in the two ways that I think that could go. If they are not an elected member of the church council by the charge conference, then the answer is no, they do not have vote. But, as we've already talked about, there can be members of your church council that are not necessarily other officers in the church. So you may have members of your church council that are not chairpersons, that isn't the lay leader. These are the at-large members. And so the bottom line to this is, when you go back and look at the list of names that was presented at your charge conference to be members of your administrative council, those are your voting members of your church council. And if the chair is absent, who presides over a meeting? Well, it is very wise to have a vice chair, so that you have someone who's already sort of second in line that can help out if that should happen. Sometimes a pastor may help preside over the meeting, but it is best if you already have a designated lay person, and maybe your lay leader would step into that position if that should be needed. And then another question was raised concerning the leadership board. Does it handle all decisions, financial and ministerial? And so the answer to that is yes. Ultimately, that leadership board is responsible for handling all of those decisions, both the visioning decisions, the nurture, outreach, witness ministry decisions, as well as the administrative decisions. And again, that one exception is with the finances. It may be easier to have another body that does the work, but presents it to the leadership team for ultimate approval and validation. Okay, so if you have other questions, feel free to email those in. Otherwise, I'm going to now talk through these tips for success. And there's a lot of really helpful information here. So, a couple of reminders of things you've already heard and then some new ideas. This is the body that sets the vision for the church. So dream big, but then hold accountable to your progress towards that vision. And you should make decisions faithfully around the work of furthering that vision. So it gets back to how important it is that your church have a sense, a vision, a snapshot, an understanding of who you are and where you're headed. What is it you're trying to do, so that you can then make sure all of the rest of your ministry aligns behind the vision so that vision can be accomplished. The second tip, begin meetings with the ministry functions first and handle the administrative functions second. And that's just a reminder of what we've already talked about, but you'd be surprised at how that changes the nature and the tenure and the tone of your meetings if you will do that. And then I suggest create a strategic agenda for each meeting without going around the circle to hear reports from every committee or team or chair. And my practice that I strongly suggest is you work off of an agenda. And so let there be a deadline that if anyone has business to attend to or a report they want to share, then they need to talk with the chairperson to get on that agenda. You may have several standing, like a financial report and a pastor's report you're always going to have. But honor that then, so that you do not get derailed by something that you weren't expecting because they didn't get up with you ahead of time to get on the agenda. And that way you know how much time to spend on some of the work that you have at hand. That agenda can be a very important tool to help you with time management and prioritizing your conversation. So chairpersons, I strongly encourage you to find a way to use your agenda to help guide your time. The fourth one, prayer and Bible study, devotion, should be a part of every meeting and not always done by the pastor, and not the 10-second obligatory prayer at the beginning, at the end. But part of your discipleship making and your spiritual formation and even your discernment with one another is you really should be spending time studying Scripture. Have a devotion that has meat and substance to it so that you are spending time forming spiritually with one another. And you've got to make that a priority, and you've got to make time for it in your agenda. Number 5, discernment should be the common practice to prepare for decision making by the council, not just taking that vote. And if you do some discernment so that you don't just call for a vote whenever a new idea comes up, it does make the consensus model much, much easier because you're giving people time to really think through and process and pray about big decisions on behalf of the church. It is not always the easiest method, though, and it does require you to work as a team to be able to reach consensus. Also, next, members of the church council should be expected to live into their membership vows. And that means supporting the church with your prayers, your presence, your gifts, your service, and your witness. If you are struggling living into those vows, then it would be incredibly appropriate for you to talk with the pastor or the chairperson and say, you know what, maybe this is not the best place of service for me right now, and to be able to take a step back and let someone else take your position, because you are, as that representative leader, you are a model and an example to others. And so if you are not able to live out a positive example of a disciple for Jesus, then maybe you shouldn't be in this kind of a leadership position where people are paying attention to the example that you set. Next, regular meetings are more effective than long, infrequent meetings. And that is really true, even when you don't think you have a lot to attend to. By coming together and studying together and praying together and then attending to your business, that is going to be a much stronger church leadership team than if you only meet quarterly or as needed or very sporadically. And then you have these really long meetings and people get frustrated. try and meet regularly so that you can stay on top of business and needs and continue to evaluate your ministry. Setting goals for the year and checking in on those goals at each meeting is important. In other words, your meeting shouldn't be reactive, all right, what do we need to attend to? But you should spend time saying, this is what we want to accomplish this year. 1, 2, 3 goals. Don't do a whole list of them, just a few goals. And then at each meeting, stop and say, hey, how are we doing? Are we making progress? Can we stop and celebrate what we've done so far? But take opportunities to evaluate and then make adjustments if you need to make adjustments. Number 9, have an annual planning day. That's a really great way to start off the year in January and do it, get a chunk of time. So you've got a block of time on a Saturday or a Sunday where you can come together and do some of the goal setting and visioning and leadership development. You can tackle a lot of things by having an annual planning day. Number 10, if you are functioning with a slimmed down leadership team like we talked about, or other model that may not have representatives from all of your different ministry areas, then you might want to consider twice a year bringing representatives in from your witness or your outreach or congregational care, all of your different teams that are doing awesome ministry, and give them a chance to share with your leadership team, how is it going? What goals have they set? How are they doing towards those goals? And probably the most important conversation you can have is, what are their stumbling blocks? What have been the areas that or the things that have kept them from reaching their goals? And then maybe you as the church leaders can help problem solve or resource them so that those goals can be achieved and your ministry can be strengthened. Number 11, this one's very important. Be transparent. Find ways to communicate what is happening in those meetings to the rest of the church. The only committee that operates in closed session is the pastor parish committee. Otherwise, anyone is welcome to come to a church council meeting. It does not mean they have vote, but they ought to be welcome, and by book of discipline, they are allowed to come and listen to your meeting. And even if they're not there, other folks aren't there, find a way to share, summarize maybe action that was taken, communicate it in a newsletter or summarize in your bulletin, whatever your best way of communicating, but periodically give the congregation an update on the work that you have been busy attending to. Number 12, spend quality time at each meeting in learning and training that's related to both ministry context. So what are the needs and the opportunities in your community, in your church? What do you need to learn about who's around you and the problems that they're facing so that you can be stronger in the ministry that you're offering? But then also, you may alternate that or spend time at different times of the year with ministry resources. So read a book together and talk about it. Learn about different ministry strategies and ideas. Visit other churches, different ways where you can learn about best practices for ministry. Number 13, pastors and council chairs. This is a helpful tip for you, but invite key leaders to meet monthly or regularly, whatever works for you, with the pastor in sort of an administrative leadership team. This helps put everybody on the same page. It builds trust. It helps keep anyone from being blindsided if something big or new is happening, that your key leaders can then provide the information that might be needed from their area to support this new idea. But that's just a good way of touching base and keeping a pulse on all of the different ministry areas, because we often get siloed. And part of the purpose of that church council is to bring the ministries together to function in a way that serves that greater purpose, that larger vision of your church. And then finally, I'm adding this one because this is actually on my tips for success for the trustees webinar, and I left this one off in my conversation, but it's so important that I want to bring it up, and you also are a body that can be a cheerleader or advocate for technology. But technology really is critical for connecting to younger Christians and newer Christians. And so every church should have a website. You should have internet access. You should have screens and projectors to use, whether it's in worship or in other ministry settings, but to have the technology there. Now, I know some churches up in the mountains literally are in places where there is no internet access, and I recognize that, and so sometimes it's out of your control. But where it is in your control, you should work and strive to make that happen so that you can begin to use technology in very positive, helpful ways that reach those for whom it speaks to them and it helps communicate the message. All right, so I don't think we do have a question. So one question is there a time limit on how long someone should hold chair positions such as admin chair? Great question. The answer to that is there should be some sort of time frame in which someone rotates on and off, just like in your administrative teams, trustees, nominations, finance, and pastor parish. People serve on a 3-year term and rotate off so that every year some people are rotating off and new people are rotating on. And so your administrative chair can serve as long as their term would be. So if your administrative chair comes on as an at-large person the very first year, then they can serve 3 years as a chairperson. If they come on as an at-large but they don't take the chair position until their second or third year, then they would only have 2 or 1 years remaining. So there is a time limit on that. It just depends on what capacity they are serving. If you may have in some smaller churches where the chair of trustees is also the chair of administrative council, and that's where it just gets a little bit messy. But the answer to that is nobody should stay in any position indefinitely. You should be rotating in and out because it is just not healthy for one person to hold a position for too long. So the next question, so with the new format, does this mean there would actually not be a separate trustee committee? Would the trustee committee now become just a trustee leader, and what happens to the remaining members of the leadership committee? Well, this is not a model that you would adopt right now. You would have to wait until your next charge conference to approve your leadership team for the following year and then work into this transition. But the answer to the first part of that question is no. That leadership team then becomes the trustees when that is needed. And so you would not necessarily have a separate trustee committee. Otherwise, that's the old model. Because the old model is you've got your separate trustee team, and then the chair of trustees is that representative onto church council. In this leadership team model, the team functions as it is needed. And so ultimately they are responsible for building and facilities, and so they would then serve as the trustees. Now, you can do a hybrid of that. In fact, I don't think I mentioned it, but I did list it on here that at Ginghamsburg, they do have 3 teams that they do separately. They do a human resources, they do a financial resources, and they do an operations. So if I were translating it, they still have a pastor parish, they still have a trustees, and they still have a finance. But that's the way, but that's a very large church. And so that's the model that works for them. You can do a hybrid. You can think through and see, well, we have a lot of facilities to manage, so we feel like we really do need a trustee team separate from that leadership team. There's flexibility here on how you define that. The important point is you be clear on how you do define it and how you organize yourself so that what you approve at your church charge conference then becomes that approved model for how you're going to function the following year. Or if you decide to do it mid-year, we can call a church conference for you to do that. My suggestion is live into it, wait until the following year so that you're clear on how the model is going to function for your church. And one more question. So with this new format, does this mean there would actually not... Oh, that's the same question. So sorry. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions that you have submitted for us to answer. So at this point, let me say thank you so much for your willingness to serve in this leadership capacity. The church council is the ultimate body that really does cast vision and help move the church forward in implementing really excellent ministry. So my hope and prayer for you is that as you start this new year, that you will work well together as a team, that you will think big, that you will dream about what it is you could be doing differently or better or new than you're doing right now, and then help your church, your pastor, your church members to reach that goal, to try that new thing, to be inspired to be bold and to take some risks, knowing that you're doing this to further the kingdom of God in your particular community. So go for it would be what I would say. Thank you so much. I will turn it back over to you for you to finish any business that you have to attend to tonight, or to continue the conversation as you may want to do so. And let me do that by closing with a word of prayer. So gracious and holy God, we do give you thanks for the opportunity to lead our churches, to help make a difference, to help raise up disciples, to help be a part of what you are trying to do here in all of our churches. And so right now, I just ask your blessing upon these leaders. Help them to be wise in their discernment. Help them to be bold in their decision making. Help them to have ears to hear what your Spirit may be saying to them, and help them to care for one another in a way that strengthens their community and strengthens their own faith journey. So, Lord, hear all of these prayers that we lift up. Amen.